All right, so now we've got this lump of clay centered. So our next step here is going to be opening and compressing and establishing the floor, okay? So the first step here is going to be to open it. I'm going to take my left thumb and place it right in the center here. And we talked a little bit in the last video about our hands supporting each other. We can have more stability if we use our hands together. So instead of just going at it with one hand here and opening, I'm gonna kind of use my strength a little more efficiently here by using my hands together. So I'm gonna take my sponge, which is full of water. Now it's not, I just squeezed some of it out. I'm gonna take my sponge, and I'm actually gonna use my sponge to press on my thumb. So I can use these two hands together to make this opening. Now you'll notice my thumb is not going straight down to make a hole. I've got it at an angle here. That's important because I don't want to just make a little teeny tiny hole in the center. I want to create a nice little opening. I'll pull this water out so you can see. A nice little opening that kind of tapers down to the bottom here. Now the next thing we need to do is check the depth to see if we're on track. So this is your needle tool. What you're gonna do is you're gonna hold your needle tool like you're shaking its hand, right? And then you're gonna extend your index finger. This is what we're gonna use to measure. With our wheel stopped, we're gonna insert this down to the wheel head, and then we're gonna extend our index finger, and that will tell us we're roughly a 1/2 inch away from the wheel head in terms of the thickness here. That little hole is not gonna be a problem. We're gonna compress and establish the floor in just a second here. So we'll be just fine. This is a good thickness. We can go a little bit thinner, but we're gonna go ahead and leave it there for now because with this next step, you're gonna thin it out just a little bit more. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna use this hand kind of like a claw. We're gonna go down to the base here with our middle finger, and we're just gonna move this straight out, okay? We're not gonna go down, we're not gonna go up, we're gonna go as horizontal as we can, just pulling this straight out, okay? And this is what that looks like. I'm gonna, again, use my hands together. Got a full sponge of water, full sponge of water, a water-filled sponge. And I'm going to press down on this hand to kind of stabilize it, and I'm just gonna pull that right towards myself, okay? So now, I've got this kind of flattened shape with a mostly flat bottom. What I'm gonna do now is compress. Compression is really important because if you don't compress well, something can happen called an S-crack, where there's not enough strength in the bottom of this pot as it dries or as it's being fired, and the tension will become so great that it will pull away and create a little S on the bottom here. And we don't want that to happen. It can happen while it's drying, it can happen in the bisque firing, and it can also happen in the glaze firing. And it's just a colossal waste of time if you don't compress this to strengthen that bottom. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my thumb and I'm gonna place it down here in the inside of this ring, and I'm gonna, again, with hands together, I'm just gonna press into the center. Now I'm not pressing this down real hard to change the thickness. I'm just kind of applying a little bit of pressure downward, but then mostly inward to try to get this nice and compressed and flattened out. So a little bit of clay chemistry for you. Clay particles are like little platelets, okay? So these platelets are their strongest when they are aligned, sitting on top of each other, nice and flat. When we do this compression, we are strengthening this bottom because we are aligning those little clay particles on top of each other just right, okay? So usually I'll make a few passes just to make sure that I'm getting good compression, because there's about a 1/2 inch of clay down there, right? There's about a 1/2 inch of clay, and all those clay molecules, they need a little bit of compression to line up properly. So now that that's done, we've got this floor established, we've compressed it really well, and the next step is going to be making our volcano shape. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to orient our hands on the opposite side of us. You can see in the mirror here, I've got my fingers kind of tucked under, and I'm basically just going to pull this in and upwards toward myself. And I've kind of got this little volcano shape going. Maybe you do it again just to kind of get that going real good. Now this is a preparation. You can see we got taller too. So this is a preparation for your first pull, which I'll show in the next video. But before we get into that, one more thing I want to show you is when you make these dramatic changes to the shape of this lump of clay, right? We centered it, excuse me, we opened it, we've established the floor and compressed the bottom really well, and then we've brought it up back into this kind of conical shape again with that same opening. So we need to compress this rim, and we just talked about compression a little bit. Part of the reason we want to compress this rim is to strengthen it, but also it can start to get a little uneven. And if we apply some consistent pressure, just like in the last video with centering, we can get this to be centered again. So the way that I do that is right here in front of me, right? Not over here, not over here, not over here. Right in front of me, I'm going to support the walls on the side, and then I'm going to make sure that this stays nice and wet. And then I'm going to apply a little bit of pressure on the top. And what that's going to do is that's going to, oops, getting a little dry again. Sometimes I'll just use my sponge on the top to make sure it stays wet. But we're just going to create a little pressure there. And what that's done, you can see it's kind of thickened this rim a little bit. And we're lining those clay particles, and we're getting this back into the center. Okay?